Hey there, everyone. People ask me all the time how yoga can be beneficial for healing trauma. And I thought I would go ahead and share this quick video with you on a couple of the reasons that I think yoga is really, really a wonderful tool for anybody who is experiencing the effects of trauma or stress or anxiety. So the first reason is because it alleviates pain and discomfort. Now, I'm not talking about all kinds of yoga in all classes and with all teachers, but if you find the right practice, it can really alleviate pain and discomfort in the body. When I was doing some really deep trauma healing years ago, I was in a lot of physical pain. So the emotional pain that I was healing from had also come to live in my body. One of my teachers, Nikki Myers, says our issues are in our tissues. And I so love that because it's really true. So for me, when I began this process of doing this really deep work on healing trauma, as that energy and as those emotions were kind of flowing out of my body, I was in a lot of pain, not just emotional pain, but also physical pain. And yoga was extremely helpful in helping me to in helping to relieve some of that pain and the discomfort. Again, now this is not for all kinds of classes. I was doing some very, very gentle trauma-informed yoga practices, but it became something that even when there were days where I was just hurting so much, I was grieving, I was in so much pain, that those 30 minutes that I would spend on my mat or 15 minutes or an hour, I would get some pain relief. And that really was attractive. So that's the first reason I can recommend yoga for healing from trauma, is because it helps with pain and discomfort. So now the second reason why yoga can be really helpful is in healing trauma is because it reduces the physical tension in our bodies. So remember that one of my favorite definitions of trauma is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling helpless, hopeless, or unable to respond. When we experience a traumatic event, our bodies produce all kinds of chemicals. And if we are lucky enough to be able to process the experience, the experience doesn't leave a residue. But if there's a lot going on already, or there's just not time, maybe because we have to get back to work the next day, or maybe because we're little and our parents are stressed because of their own issues and things going on. If we don't have an opportunity to process those big feelings and experiences, those chemicals actually end up turning into the tension we experience in our bodies. And so a lot of times maybe you'll have neck tension. For me, I've had chronic neck tension for for many, many years, I should say. And what that was kind of the hypervigilance, right, in my nervous system from some traumatic experiences that I had had, both in terms of shock trauma and developmental trauma. So you might notice like, oh, there's a place in my body where I hold a lot of tension. Physical tension. It comes like armoring on us, and that gives us a sense of control. What yoga can help do, though, is yoga can help us to relieve some of that physical tension, so that we don't have to be so reactive. Now, what happens when we release that physical tension, however, is some of the emotions perhaps that were trapped for decades get expressed. And that's a good thing. It's not always a fun thing, but it's a really, really healthy and good thing. And if you're looking to be more resilient and to create greater health for the long term, it's really something that you want to consider, right? Is allowing yourself to process through some of those events. And so that's the second reason I highly encourage you to think about yoga as a method for healing trauma. Now, the third reason I like to encourage yoga for healing trauma is because it's a great opportunity to learn about, cultivate, and practice boundaries. So the way it was described to me once years ago, that really made a lot of sense to me. When I first started practicing yoga back in the early 2000s, I was not a fan. Definitely was not a fan. My head was comparing myself to everybody in the room. I couldn't keep up. It was too fast. it just wasn't my jam. It took me many, many years to find yoga that was my jam. But why am I telling you this story? Totally having a mental puzzle moment. Oh yeah, a chance to practice boundaries. What one of my teachers eventually taught me though was, if you are focusing on what other people in the room are doing, or what's happening in the mirror, or what's going to happen next week or tomorrow, or what happened yesterday, you're not practicing good boundaries. And that really got me curious. And the invitation was, see if you can keep your focus just for this half-hour practice or hour, however long the practice is, on what's going on your mat. And let me tell you, when I first started this, it was impossible, because my nervous system was so dysregulated. I was always used to being in the past and in the future. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next week? I don't have time for this. I just want to get in a good workout and move along, right? There's all this stuff going on in my head. But when I got this invitation to practice these boundaries, I began this process of thinking, okay, anytime I'm on the yoga mat and something outside of what's happening on my mat is up, that's good information. That means that something has been triggered in me that is causing me to leave my own center. Now, this is really, really important, because folks who I work with who experience stress, anxiety, and trauma, and especially folks in the helping professions, we can have boundaries that sometimes are really, that aren't necessarily strong and healthy. And what I mean by that is, like, maybe we overgive or we overshare, and then we feel guilty that we overshared, or we feel ashamed or embarrassed, or we have difficulty saying no, right? These are all indications that we have some boundary work to do. So when on the yoga mat, it's a great opportunity to practice in a low stress environment, cultivating boundaries. So I can practice noticing, like, okay, for 30 minutes, I'm going to just notice how, if I can stay present with what's happening on my mat for just one breath, right? If I can just do it for one breath. When I first started, I probably couldn't. It was intolerable to my nervous system to be present in that way. But maybe if you can do one breath, you can do two breaths. And if you can do two breaths, maybe you get 5 minutes on the mat, right? Or 10 minutes. But eventually what happened for me, and I have seen happen in other folks, is as we practice keeping the boundary of bringing our awareness to what's happening on the mat, our sensations, our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, our breath, our drishti, our gazing point, right? If we can bring our awareness to those things, we are learning to cultivate boundaries. And that's super, super important, because a lot of folks who have had their boundaries either violated or never formed at a really young age, they tend to also continue to have boundary violations, because we're not there to protect our boundaries, right? And I can certainly say this for myself. If I am checked out of my body and I am over there, if there's a tiger in the room, or there's somebody who's not treating me well in the room, I won't even notice it until it's gone really, really far. Whereas if my boundaries are intact, I'll notice it much, much sooner, and I can be able to respond in a proactive way, which will help me to cultivate resilience and prevent from getting traumatized, to experiencing further trauma. So practicing boundaries is one of the great things that we can do on the yoga mat. Number 4, one of the most powerful things about yoga is that when practiced with mindfulness, we can actually become more compassionate and accepting of ourselves exactly the way we are. So think about it. You go into a yoga class, or you watch a yoga video, either online or in person. Most folks are doing everything online these days, but that's changing. And if you're one of those folks who compares yourself to other people, right, you'll probably be comparing yourself. In some places, you're like, oh yeah, I'm such a badass. I'm so much better than her. I can do this pose differently. Or maybe you're at the opposite end of the spectrum and you're like, I can't do anything. I'm such a loser. I'll never get this. I'm too fat. I'm too old. I'm too sick. I'm too infirm, right? All these kinds of stories. And when we practice yoga with mindfulness, which is just about paying attention without judgment in the present moment, we can begin to cultivate an attitude of acceptance and compassion for ourselves. Now you might be thinking, well, I don't want to accept the way I am, right? I want to change the way I am. Yes, I understand. I understand. But what I've observed is that shame never causes anybody to change, and whipping somebody yourself isn't a long-term sustainable solution. You wouldn't be here watching this video if it really worked, right? You've been there, you've done that. You're looking for another approach. And so when we can bring a spirit of mindfulness into our yoga practice, of noticing, of like, oh, I'm noticing I'm judging myself on the mat today because yesterday I could do more, right? And today I'm feeling weaker. I'm feeling more vulnerable. I'm feeling more tired. That's an opportunity to practice compassion, and it's an opportunity to practice radical self-acceptance. And what I know is that when we can practice radical self-acceptance for ourselves, we can also be much more accepting and inclusive of others. And if you are interested in seeing the world become a better place where there is greater equality and justice and opportunity for all, regardless of religion or gender or identity in any way, shape, or form, then you know that compassion and acceptance of yourself is the beginning to having compassion and acceptance for other people. And so that's one of the biggest advantages, right? If you're trying to contribute to making the world a more meaningful place, if that's something that you'd like to see, it's got to start with self-acceptance and self-compassion. Easier said than done, for sure. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please reach out and let me know how your yoga practice is going. If you need any additional support, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, bye for now.